I just wanted to do a real quick video today to sort of celebrate my final read of May. I finished reading the Silo Trilogy. This is kind of an older one. This specific one for the final book of the trilogy was like 2013, so I don't know really how popular of a series it was at the time it came out, or if people even care about the fact that I've read it now, but I finished it and I'm super excited. It's been a several month process. I got the very first book, which is called Wool. I got that from a library book sale, and I got it as an audiobook. It was one of those really awesome sales that they sometimes do where it's like $1 for an entire audiobook on CD, and so I had to pick it up because it sounded like a fun premise, and it was only $1 kind of a thing, and I really enjoyed it. And then I had to, well, I didn't have to, but I decided to get the second book just through the library, because I wanted to listen to the audiobook again, and since I didn't have a free and easy, or pretty much free and easy copy of it, I figured I'd just go through the library system, and in that sense I'm kind of glad that I went with that anyways, because I didn't like the second one quite as much. It set up things well for the third one, but it felt overall very unnecessary to me, but we'll get into that more in a minute. And then finally, I got this one, which has actually been sitting at the library for weeks, waiting for me to pick it up, but unable to pick it up because the library wasn't doing holds for a little while. But now I can do curbside hold pickups, and this was in my first batch of books that I picked up. And I started reading it, and it just completely hit my tastes for right now, which I think maybe has to do with the fact that it was like familiar characters, but still a new story, and so it just hit that perfect right mood for me right now, and I'm really happy that I read it. It only took 2 days to get through this, which is almost 500 pages, and for me, especially with my quarantine reading being mostly novella length stuff, is quite the accomplishment right now, and it gives me hope that I can still read long books and finish long books. So, what are my overall thoughts on this series, right? I wanted to kind of talk about it. As I mentioned, I really adored the first book. The basic premise of the Silo Trilogy is it's like a post-apocalyptic kind of setting, and humanity now lives in a silo, which is buried underground. They've got like one floor that's above, and they can see this dusty wasteland outside, and when people do criminal things like dreaming about going outside and trying to find a better life outside of the silo, or just other criminal acts, they get sentenced to go outside of the silo to clean their video feeds, and then they die out there. And that's our basic premise and the basic setup, and I don't know, especially for like a post-apocalyptic thing, which oftentimes isn't really my thing. The whole thing just struck my fancy really well. I really liked the sheriff that we start the whole story with. I really like Juliet, who becomes the sheriff. I enjoyed Lucas a lot, who ends up being one of the major players throughout the story. So the first book, really great, really solid. Then we get to the sequel, and I was kind of disappointed in it, like I mentioned before. So we have our basic setup in the series, so getting into mild spoilers now with the second book. The premise for the second book features a silo, but also features the past and how the silos got built. And it had a lot of like politicians and political bargaining kind of stuff leading up to how the silos ended up getting built, and how people ended up in them, and how they're functioning now, and I didn't care for it. Like, the stuff that happened in the silo in book 2 was good, because we learn about silo number 1. There are like 50 total, and number 1 is kind of like the control center of all of it that kind of arranged everything. It has the politicians and things in it who were the ones who originally designed the silos, and their silo works a little differently than all the other silos, because the other silos, it's just people living their lives. People are born, people die there, and they just live out a full life there. Versus in Silo 1, since they're like the politicians and things who arrange the whole thing, have it set up that they go in and out of cryo sleep and go on shifts. Which is why that book is called Shift. And so their setup is a little different so that they can maintain humanity, basically, that's living in these other silos until the world is cleaned up and they can go out into freedom, kind of a thing. Honestly, a lot of that I felt like could have been cut down and not mentioned, especially the early stuff where it's like, this is the stuff that happened way before the silo, where we're basically in like modern America setting up things and I'm just reading stupid political stuff. It was not my cup of tea. And I felt like that could have been condensed a lot and potentially even spread throughout Wool and Dust, which are the first and third books, and just dispersed a little better that way, and then we could have still had the information we needed, but without a lot of the backstory stuff that I felt was mostly extraneous. But, you know, whatever. And then finally, we hit the third book, and as I said, it completely hit my mood because I knew the characters, but it was a new story. We're back to just the silo stuff that's like modern era for the story, all the same time period as in the first book and all of that, and it was so good. This book was so action-packed, it felt like something was happening on every page and I just couldn't put it down. There were so many exciting events that happened, and like halfway through the book, when stuff really starts hitting the fan, I was like, oh my gosh, what's gonna happen? How are we gonna get through this? How is there still another half of this book left? And it was just so well paced and so fun, and I'm really glad that I was finally able to read it and pick it up, and I'm really glad that I finished a 500-page book, or nearly 500-page book, and that I can still do that, and that I kind of found my reading jam. So if you have any other recommendations of like post-apocalyptic series that you think might fall in this vein, if you happen to have read this, or just from what I've described have some ideas of some stories that might match, that'd be great. I'm not super into ones that are like the Hunger Games, where it's just like super violent stuff, so not that level of post-apocalyptic, but where it's like humanity surviving through crazy circumstances like this one was. Those ones are good and more my cup of tea so far as post-apocalyptic stuff goes. So yeah, if you happen to have any recommendations, that'd be great. I'd be happy to hear them. If you happen to have also read this trilogy and have any thoughts on it, I'd love to have discussions about it, because it's super fun, and I don't actually really know anyone else who's read it, so if you happen to have read it, I'd be happy to hear your thoughts and kind of get some other opinions on it. But I think that's all I've got for now. I highly recommend you go out and pick up the Silo Trilogy if you haven't read it, especially if you like post-apocalyptic stuff. I think it could be your cup of tea. But yeah, I think that's all I've got for now. This is the Umlaut Harper signing out.